So my name is Michael Puett. I am honored to be directing the Asia Center, and more specifically the entire Asia Center, together with the Fairbanks Center, the Mattal Center, and the Harvard Yenching Institute, are deeply honored to be hosting this conference, a study of reincarnation in Tibetan Buddhism. This is an extraordinary event that has taken also an extraordinary amount of planning and work, so let me immediately thank the organizers who have done such an incredible job. Lobsang Sangye, Janet Gyatso, Tenzin Tsedup, who is off doing something, working away madly. All three have been, oh no, there you are. So all three of you have been absolutely extraordinary. Our deep thanks to all three of you for the incredible amount of work you've done. And let me also say the Asia Center is very much a team. The entire staff of the Asia Center have been incredible, will continue to be incredible every time there is, and there will be, a problem with our AV. Jorge will be running up and fixing it for us. You've already seen the tremendous staff who are going to be putting together our foods, our receptions, organizing the beautiful poster. So, deep thanks to the organizers and to the entire staff of the Asia Center. Please join me in thanking them. So let me begin with a few very general words. So the topic of reincarnation, one might think would be an issue of constant discussion and analysis. As Gananatha Boris-Sekri has argued, a very substantial number of humans who have ever lived on the planet have believed in reincarnation. I can tell you, as someone trained in the Western Academy, you can go through a college and graduate career almost never hearing about reincarnation, even when you are studying traditions that practice reincarnation. It is entirely possible to take courses on Buddhism, much less so now, but certainly when I was going through, showing my sadly not even distant age, to learn about Buddhism and learn all about the Four Noble Truths, etc. And barely have a mention of reincarnation. I did a PhD in anthropology. I can also tell you it was entirely possible to take entire courses on indigenous groups and only find out in passing in a footnote in one of the readings that actually you were doing all of these readings on cultures, the rituals of which are based on reincarnation. Never mentioned. It is this incredibly important thing that is almost never discussed. Now, I mentioned my age, and I do so not only as to pity me, but also to say this has begun to change, but even with the change, more recently you're getting scholarship in the Western Academy that will, for example, talk about reincarnation as a belief system, and it will be discussed in terms of other belief systems around the world. So the good news is at least it's being discussed, but when you talk about reincarnation as a belief system, this is still inadequate, because the truth is reincarnation works as, well, a part of life. It is a way of living, it is a part of life, it is the basis on which rituals, on which life, on which political institutions are built, and only if we are taking reincarnation seriously as a way of life, in other words, in terms of how it organizes life, debates surrounding it, ways it works, only if we do so do we ever bring ourselves to at least the potential of truly understanding the workings of reincarnation. Not, again, as a distant abstract belief, but in terms of the actual practices that it entails. And the brilliance of our organizers, among the many brilliances that you'll be seeing over the course of the next 2 days, is precisely to say, let's look at that. Let us look at the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and let us look at reincarnation in the workings of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. At what point historically does reincarnation become a key part of the political system and the religious system in Tibet? How does that play out historically? What are the tensions, complexities, and workings that develop with reincarnation as, again, a way of life? How does that play out much more recently with all of the tragedies that have played out over the 20th century? How is it playing out right now with the current debates of who decides the reincarnation? Will the Dalai Lama, His Holiness, decide his own reincarnation, or will there be groups in Beijing that will be able to decide the reincarnation? How will that play out? And right now, How do we position ourselves in terms of and thinking through that oncoming debate? In other words, how do we understand this as a way of life if we take it seriously and work out its implications? To meet this goal, our brilliant organizers have done what you all are seeing in this program. Bring together specialists working on all sorts of aspects of the workings of reincarnation in Tibetan Buddhism. Aspects historically, ethnographically, practitioners, looking at various movements, developments, tensions, complexities in the workings of reincarnation over the past several centuries, very much up to and including the current period. The argument being, by bringing these specialists together, by allowing us all to talk together and work through this, we can begin to understand reincarnation as a way of life, understand its implications, and begin to think through those implications going forward. Then undoubtedly this is going to become an incredibly significant and sadly possibly very, very divisive issue in the years and decades to come. In terms of the organization of this conversation, we have intentionally, I say royally, it's actually Tenzin's brilliant organizing principles, have chosen this room to do so. And we do so because, as you can see, this is not a grand auditorium where everyone is kept very removed from everyone else. It is an intimate room that was literally designed to be a place where we can talk. Now, I realize many of you forced into the back or wondering why we didn't do the huge auditorium. However, you will quickly see why, because even though you may feel stuffed at the back at the moment, you will also feel, and we want this to be put into practice over the course of the next 2 days, as part of a conversation. You will not be in a distant auditorium, you're shouting down at a stage that's 200 feet away. You'll be in a relatively intimate space. You can speak, we can see you speaking, we can talk back and forth to each other, and we are organizing the conference this way intentionally. So we will hear from these specialists. The specialists will be talking together. All of you joining us, we encourage you, and you have ample time for conversations amongst us. And the goal is precisely through those conversations to begin wrestling with these complex issues. Also, we will intentionally organize it in a way to allow those conversations to spill out over other things too. So there'll be the formal events here, we'll have lots of breaks, lots of time to eat together, drink together. These two are important, so please don't think of the breaks as times to run off into your email. I mean, you don't have to do our email, but please think of them as times to continue those conversations just slightly more informally. And our hope is we together as a group, large group, but nonetheless a group that can really talk, will together work through these complexities and really begin to work through what it means to think of reincarnation as a way of life and work through its implications as such. Now, with that as a very general set of introductions, let me now turn to one of our 3 organizers who will speak more specifically about this conference and the goals of the conference. The person in question is, as you undoubtedly can tell from where my eyes are now turning, is of course Janet Gyatso, one of the leading specialists in the world on the study of Tibetan Buddhism. She has written stunningly brilliant works on reincarnation and its implications, both in terms of what that would mean in terms of a biography. How do we think of a biography if we take reincarnation seriously? How do we think of reincarnation in terms of relations of humans to humans? How do we think of reincarnation in terms of the relationships between humans and animals? How would we rethink our ethical understandings of the world in terms of human to human and human to animal relations once we take reincarnation seriously? And how could these ideas be brought into our conversations, again, understanding it not as an abstract belief system, but as a way of life that we should learn to take seriously. So as someone in her scholarship who truly has tried to fully embody the ideals of this conference, it is my deep honor to introduce Janet Gyatso, and please join me in giving her our very warmest welcome.
Thank you, Michael, for your very generous comments. And when Michael started to say that I had written extensively on reincarnation, I started shaking my head. No, I haven't. But then I realized that I have, actually. Actually, my first book has a lot to do with meditation. Thanks for reminding me of that. Anyway, welcome, everybody. It's really nice to see all of you. Many of you I know, either from here at Harvard or from places near and far. So it's great to see this group, and I do look forward to the conversation that's been promised in this room. I don't know about the architecture of the, I don't know, it's kind of like, there's a lot of walls, but we'll try to rise above them. Anyway, my thanks go to Asia Center and Michael as its newly enthroned enlightened director.
Very unenlightened.
And he is enlightened, and the Mental Institute as well, and the Fairbanks Center, and also James Robson, who was the previous director, was very instrumental, and Jorge Espada and Tenzin Tsedup in particular for their very great work in putting this together. I know that it's really a lot of work. And I'm happy to see a conference very much focused on Tibet. That's my area of specialty. There hasn't been so much from Asia Center or at Harvard more generally, a very specifically Tibet-focused conference. And especially apropos the sort of geopolitical dimensions of this phenomenon of reincarnating lamas, works out very well as being especially appropriate. It's also a phenomenon that stretches across Asia, which is part of Asia Center's self-conception, not only talking about a single place, even though it is focused on Tibet, but it stretches across Inner Asia, certainly to Mongolia, and has major implications across Asia, certainly in China and also South Asia. Reincarnating lamas in particular opens up the question of a very important phrase that's one of the bywords of all of Tibetan Buddhism. In Tibetan, Sishi Sungdrel, which means samsara and nirvana come together or integrated. It is really an incredibly fascinating case where religion, in the most religion sense of religion, in the deepest kind of mystical, mysterious levels of religion, intersect with on-the-ground, hard-nosed politics, and they all come together. It's not so easy to find examples of that sort. It's not one is watered down and the other is dominant. They both are at play. And it's a really kind of amazing phenomenon. Michael started talking about the larger phenomenon of reincarnation in Buddhism. And as I'm sure you all know, there is a widespread presumption that when beings die, they are reborn in another lifetime, in another time and place. Happens over and over again. It's happened to all of us. And it is true also that that notion has room for crossing over into other cultures and certainly into other species. That's a whole other area. We're not going to be talking about reincarnating animals today, but all beings, according to Buddhism, reincarnate over and over again. However, the idea in general is that we do so without much control. We don't know what we're doing, especially when we die. Dying is a moment of great fear and confusion for the large majority of all sentient beings on the planet. And as we go through this process of dying and ultimately being reborn, we're basically driven by what they call the winds of karma. The karma is blowing us and moving us to the place where we ought to go because of the karma that we have already been accumulating, and then it unfolds in, whoops, we got into a new womb of a mother, and we are now in a gestation period, and then we're going to be born, and we really don't know what's happening. And we don't have really any idea, especially of our last lives. So that's the general idea, and it's all about karma. And so the only way that you can address it is by trying to create good karma, being a good person, doing meritorious things is going to keep you in good places and good states where you will be reborn. Once you get into certain elements of Buddhism, and most of what I'm talking about is a very, very specifically Tibetan development. So as everyone knows also, the great mass of the wealth of Indian Buddhist scriptures and doctrines and ideas migrated to Tibet and were fully adopted, translated, commented upon massively. But certain ideas are very specific, and this particular idea, this phenomenon, is really quite unique to the Tibetan cultural area, not only what we call Tibet, depends how you define Tibet, certainly Mongolia and inside of China proper, etc. But the notion of reincarnation started to be talked about in terms of this intermediate state that the so-called antarabhava in Sanskrit. So after you die, you go into a sort of a kind of uncharted zone, which classically lasts for 49 days. It's not necessarily lasting that long. So we find references to that idea where you're in this so-called intermediate state and you're like bopping around and then you find your way into the new parents where you're going to be born. But it's just mentioned actually quite briefly. Very little information about what happens, what the mechanics of it. And then you get this explosion in Tibetan Buddhism of giving you an incredibly detailed account of that intermediate state, which is really quite unique to Tibetan Buddhism. There might be some precedents in Tantric Buddhism, there's some suggestions, but nothing like what we see in the Tibetan Buddhist case. I'm sure you're all familiar with something called the Tibetan Book of the Dead. That's only one example of the many, many treatises and investigations on what is that phenomenon that happens in that intermediate state. So we're not going to be talking about the bardo per se, but so parts of the elements of what we see in reincarnating lamas can be identified in Indian Buddhism. So for one thing, the basic idea that some very specially highly developed people can in fact retain consciousness, retain intentionality, know what they're doing during the death process, remain aware, not get scared, not get frightened, and actually control the process of getting reborn. And so in the stories of the life of the Buddha, for example, that principle is already instantiated. So the stories about the Buddha, he was practicing for many, many lifetimes, and he was reincarnating many, many times, and he knew that this was his time, that he was going to be, in fact, the Buddha, the savior of the world. And he deliberately chose his parents. He wanted to be born in a royal family. He wanted not to be born in a Brahmin family, but in a Kshatriya or warrior family. That's part of the early story of the Buddha. It shows up relatively early. So that's one piece of the reincarnation phenomenon that we see in Tibet, namely that you can, if you're a very, very, very special and highly trained person, you can retain consciousness and control over that practice. So there is that. There is also very widespread in Buddhism that goes along with the idea of the Buddha having lived for many lifetimes before he became the Buddha, of remembering past lives. So that certainly is also a very widespread phenomenon. The well-known literary genre of the Jatakas, where masters tell the stories of who they were in a past lifetime. Usually there's a moral or ethical twist to the story to make people understand the connection between what you did in this lifetime and what kind of birth that you got in your next lifetime. Again, the principle of karma is playing out there. But just that idea of remembering past lives is something relatively widespread early on in the Buddhist tradition, in the Theravada world, in Mahayana Buddhism, etc. And certainly, as Michael also was pointing out, of course, in religions around the world and contexts around the world, this is not an uncommon thing for young kids even to have some sort of sense that they remember something from that seems to be a past life. However, recognizing a rebirth of somebody as having lived as their previous life, having known who that previous life was, and now recognizing who is the new reincarnation, is a precedent that's much, much harder to find, I think, in the Buddhist world. And that recognition is fully historical. It's not a mythological creature who I was in the last time. It's somebody that we know historically, and we know when they died, and now you see this kid who's several years old, and you actually say, this guy is that person. It's true that the Buddha does that on occasion as well. Again, going back to early Buddhism, when he sometimes recognizes certain people as reincarnations from the past, but it doesn't have that historical valence. In the case that we're talking about in Tibet, these are not stories, these are actual historically real people. And especially doing that in order to create religious leadership. It's a means by which you can recognize a master or somebody who was already acting as a leader in a previous lifetime, and in order to continue their career, it's a device that, even though they've died, it's a way to carry on their lineage in another lifetime and keep living. It's not claiming that the person has lived forever. I mean, it's a whole big debate, like, you know, are we actually immortal because we keep reincarnating, and the Buddhists would refuse that. It's not the same person, but it's a continuity. It's caused by, the causal chain is there. That's a unique thing for Tibetan Buddhism started doing that. We talk about Karma Pakshi. You'll hear much more about the history tomorrow. In the 13th century, he was a very highly developed Buddhist teacher and master who was talking to Longye Khan and then Kubla Khan in a politically and militarily complex period in Tibetan history. He had certain political connections, although he was primarily a religious master. But this is probably one of the first outstanding cases in the 13th century of someone then going on to recognize who his reincarnation is when he died, and having him take up the same position as one of the leaders of the Karmapa sect and carry on his tradition. However, I do want to point out that the phenomenon of reincarnation, recognizing reincarnations of a previously deceased person, is not really only limited to political leaders at all. And early on in the literature, I have examples from some of the research that I have done. For example, the guy I wrote my dissertation on, Tenzin Tsedup, a very great master and saint who had almost no political influence anywhere. He was an amazing person, however, and he discovered the reincarnation of his consort, his female consort. It's a very different case where neither of them had any kind of political position whatsoever. He just was looking for, you know, someone he had lost, and I don't know what exactly happened. It's only mentioned very briefly, but somehow recognized. This is really an interesting phenomenon of recognition, of looking in the eyes of the person and saying, oh my God, this person is that other person, and having no particular political implications. Nonetheless, I will grant, and most of the cases we'll be talking about here have to do with political positions, and even more so than political, I would say merely institutional. A lot of reincarnating lamas has to do with monasteries and other educational institutions who are looking for a leader of the institution or a house or something of that sort. Of course, many of these people have either minor or major political roles as well. But that's the way that it has mostly gained attention in Tibetan Buddhism. And one of the things that has been pointed out by scholars is, at least in Tibetan history, some of the greatly important, at the moment early on in the 12th and 13th centuries when Buddhist leaders were first stepping onto the political stage as well. So for example, in the Sakya masters, and having an interaction with the Mongols and other actors in Central Asia, that they were often passing on their power from uncle to nephew. Of course, these were mostly monks, so they don't have children, but it still was a family affair. And it also, and passing on power from one to another was also something that especially wealthy families or powerful families in the area could have some influence on. And some scholars have concluded that there was in some way an intentional effort to move it out of the hands of particular families, such that you kind of throwing your hands up in the air into this kind of zone of indeterminacy, like just saying we don't know where this is going to happen. It only manifests according to a logic that's very hard for anybody to grasp, and it's very hard for anybody to have control over that, because according to the theory, it's out of the intentional practice of the person who is going through that process of reincarnating. So that bardo sphere, the sphere of the intermediate state, which it's anyone's guess where that person's going to show up. And notably, this has not actually always been true. In fact, powerful families have indeed come back and controlled the process of recognizing reincarnation, and there's been lots of abuses of the system, which I'll just say a little bit more about in a moment. But nonetheless, you also have cases where the child is found 3,000 miles away, having nothing to do with the local politics of what's going on there. So it's an interesting device that tried to shed the influence of political parties. And especially, I think, the idea of doing it through specific practices of yoga. We are going to hear one fascinating paper tomorrow that's going to, I think, get into some of the details of that yogic process. But it's a quite extraordinary idea that given the idea that there is something called reincarnation, that first of all, it's an extraordinary idea that you can retain awareness and intentionality as you're dying. The most scary thing that ever happens to any of us. And also employ esoteric channels in the body, physiologically move certain substances and energies in your body in a certain way to guide your mind or consciousness, or however you want to talk about it, and your habitual tendencies, whatever that package is that is kind of morphing and changing, and being so consciously intentional. It's an incredibly almost arrogant or incredibly confident to claim that our guys can do that. It's truly an amazing claim. And I was also going to mention that one other example, this is what I did write about, was that not only is the idea that a master can do that themselves, but there's also ways, especially in this so-called treasure tradition that I worked on, where certain very highly developed masters will designate a person, say, in the room, that because the master sees in 300 years from now, there's going to be a situation where I need this to be done. I need this teaching to be given. I need some building to be built. And I'm going to name you, and I'm going to put my fingerprint on your consciousness, and you are going to have several reincarnations, and then you are going to be reborn as such and such a person. They're going to give you your name of who you're going to be 300 years from now. who your parents are, even sometimes down to what your fingerprints are going to look like. And you will be born there and you will do my bidding 300 years from now. So someone else intentionally controlling your process of going through, and then, you know, all these other lives in between where you don't even know what's going on, you're just walking around as like a normal person, and then all of a sudden you look down at your finger and then you see the text, which is the prophecy which came 300 years ago. Oh my God, that's me. You know, and I'm supposed to now do this. It's an amazing, this is like a huge tradition in Tibetan Buddhism. So Tibetan Buddhists, you know, they were out there, we know that. They did a lot of strange and weird stuff, but this is one of them. This is one of them, and we see it, it's just very fascinating. So, what else do I have to say? Not to say that the reincarnating system, so obviously the Dalai Lama has been, you know, one of the most well-known, but there's many, I'm sure everyone knows here, there's many other reincarnating lines throughout Tibetan history. Not to say that it always was well received. Many Tibetan intellectuals and scholars over the course of the centuries have critiqued the reincarnation system. They see it as rigged, they see it as false. It's not, you know, it's obviously subject to a lot of question, because how the hell do you really know for sure? And usually it works through signs or very particular little clues that have to be interpreted, that are up for debate in terms of what those clues actually mean. It's intentionally that way, but at the same time it's obviously open to a lot of abuse. And I'm not sure if any of our speakers is talking about this, but one could cite lots of literature where Tibetans complain about the reincarnating system as being something that should be gotten rid of. So I just wanted to say that that's out there. Okay, I want to just talk about the elephant in the room. I think it's already been mentioned, but I just want to own it. Obviously, this is a somewhat sensitive topic, and it has enormous political implications at the moment. I just wanted to point out that there is concern and consternation on both sides, not just only one side. So obviously, the People's Republic of China has great stake in what happens in the Tibetan community, and the Dalai Lama has a huge significance and importance for China. Because the Dalai Lama was the head of the government when China took over in 1959, he escaped to India. He has commanded the devotion of Tibetans and has been vilified by the Chinese, often called a wolf in sheep's clothing, because of the deep and important political implications of what the Dalai Lama means, and especially the threatening nature of the still remaining great devotion, largely amongst Tibetans, for the Dalai Lama. And I am sure that they are aware of this conference. I know that they're aware of this conference and are watching it very closely, and are also very much watching what's going to happen when the current Dalai Lama passes away. However, I didn't expect, but also the other side. And I don't know so much about this, but I do know that the community, the exile community in Dharamsala, this is the seat of the Dalai Lama, is also not happy with this conference. Exactly what the reasons are, I can't say, but I believe there is a sense, first of all, it's somehow seen as inauspicious that this conference should be talking about the next Dalai Lama when the current Dalai Lama is still alive. For Tibetans, you know, auspiciousness is very, very important, and even to, you know, entertain the idea that he might die, even though of course everyone knows that he might, is a bad omen. And I think that there's also a real sense of concern of anybody, you know, who are we in this room? We're, you know, we're largely scholars, but we're also actors in the political scene. Who are we to be even talking about this and intervening in what is, in fact, extremely delicate and private process that, you know, is not something that should be public or dissected or critiqued. So, and I can say, you know, on both sides, we had a broader list of invitees, both from the PRC and from the Tibetan community in exile, and people on both sides didn't come because of the sensitivity of this conference of not wanting to be here. However, that's okay. First of all, at least officially, we do not have the intention of predicting or talking about what's going to happen in the future with the next Dalai Lama, per se. It's meant really to investigate the phenomenon of reincarnation in all of its very implications. So not focused on that particular question, even though it might seem that way. And I hope that that makes sense as a scholarly and an intellectual exercise in getting to know some very, a very interesting and fascinating phenomenon that happened on the Tibetan plateau at a certain moment in time. And certainly were we to talk about the future, it would only be pure speculation, because I think, as we all know, not only with this case, but almost anything that happens, including elections in various countries that don't have the name, we don't know what's going to happen. So it's not worth speculating. Anyway, that's my introduction. I think you are going to be treated to some specialist talks I just wanted to read to you the list of universities that are represented tomorrow in the various speakers from Tsinghua University in Beijing, from Tenzin Tsedup Lin Foundation in Dharamsala, from University of Wisconsin in Madison, University of Michigan, Old Dominion University, University of Aberdeen in Scotland, Aarhus University in Denmark, City University of Hong Kong, University of Calcutta, Cornell University, Columbia University, Harvard University, the Washington Post, and University of Westminster. So it's a broad and diverse group of people. I hope you enjoy the papers, and hopefully all the chairs will be sure to save time for the discussion that will ensue. So welcome everybody, and I understand that we have a special treat now, right? Music. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. I'm Tenzin Tsedup at the Asia Center. I'm the Programs and Affiliates Coordinator, and I'm here to welcome Tsedup onto the stage. He is a Tibetan traditional performing artist based here in Boston. He graduated from Tibetan Institute of Performing Arts based in Dharamsala, India, which was started by His Holiness the Dalai Lama soon after he arrived in India. So welcome Tsedup to the stage. And after this, we have a reception outside, and I hope everyone will join us tomorrow for a full day of conference starting at 9. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mudula, and hello everyone. I'm going to start off with my traditional song called Nangmateshe. So this typically song came from 16th century during the time of His Holiness the 5th Dalai Lama. So I hope you all like it. Thank you. So the next song, I would like to share a spiritual song that I composed. So I hope you will like it.
저기 조남라 전주벌도다니 겹수 채워 닭이 지속예배 손남기 돌아편지상에 두벌쇼지 상계치다 저기 조남나 전주벌도다니 겹수 채워 닭이 지속예배 손남기 돌아편지상에 두벌쇼지 Lama
Tujina.